and more than 26,000 volunteers. We work across different cause verticals such as environment, community development, and education, etc. Before we begin, I would like to remind the participants to be on mute for the session to avoid any kind of background noise that may interfere with the event. However, if there are any questions that you would like us to answer, please share it on the chat option available to you. We will be doing a Q&A session, Q&A at the end of the session, and you can also share in your questions with us via the feedback form. Moving forward, we truly appreciate all our attendees for joining us today to learn more on the strategies for scaling programs and outreach. Through this webinar, we aim to inform the NGOs on how to effectively implement scaling up initiatives while reflecting on the internal and external factors that create supportive environments for the same. Our panel discussion has been divided into three phases. Phase 1 is focused on defining high impact for nonprofits. Phase 2 will inform us on the factors that affect scaling, and during Phase 3, we'll be discussing the topic of surviving, sustaining, and scaling in the COVID times. I would like to now introduce you to all our panel of speakers present with us today. We have with us Kanishka Bhattacharya, an associate partner with Dalberg Advisors based in Mumbai. He advises private and public sector partners on strategy, planning and management, market analysis, and monitoring and evaluation. We have Shashank Rastogi with us, a principal in the Bridgebank Group's Mumbai office. He has more than 15 years of experience in impact investing, social entrepreneurship, and rural markets. And we have Karthik Verma, a program director of state transformation programs at Cavalier Education Foundation. He has an illustrious portfolio of 18 years of experience in various companies in the domain of organizational development and HR consulting. I would like to now invite Shashank to share his thoughts on why is purpose, mission, and values alignment critical to nonprofits. Shashank?
Yeah. Thanks, Adelina. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So when we talk about purpose, mission, value alignment, these are big words, but fundamentally, these form the DNA of the organization. Yeah, whether you are an advocacy organization, a research organization, or a direct service organization, all NGOs are in service business where you're delivering the benefit to the consumers through people. What the purpose and mission do is they create the foundation, the bedrock on which the organization can be built. And what the value alignment or like creating a common set of values and communicating and aligning the whole organization to those values does is each and every person in the organization would have a clear understanding of why he or she is performing a certain role and why that role is important. So these things ensure that people who are working in very difficult circumstances, probably getting paid much less than what they really deserve, they know why they are making those sacrifices and continuing.
So, based on what you shared, we do understand that beneficiaries are the prime focus for any non-profit organization. Now, keeping that in mind, how would you define a high-performance nonprofit and a high-impact nonprofit? And which one should be an area of focus for an NGO? Shashank?
Sure. So I'm not sure if these are two different things. As you pointed out, the community is in the center. The NGO, the organization is there to serve the community. And if you're not able to achieve that purpose, if you're not able to serve your community well, then how are you really a high performance organization? It's like creating a machine which runs 24 hours but doesn't really give any output. So and that's where I think the whole linkage from mission to strategy to operating model and then the how you're measuring performance comes in. You start with your mission, you define your strategy on how you're going to achieve your mission in 15 years, 20 years, 50 years, whatever that timeline is given your mission. You then define your operating model, define the roles that people will play, and then measure your performance, keeping the impact in like center of what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Shashank. Kanishka, would you like to add on to what Shashank has shared based on your experience with the development sector?
Yeah, certainly, and I think very much agree with Shashank in terms of mission alignment. Starting with the broad vision in mind, which is what is the change that you want to seek in the world today, and then having the organization built around that in terms of how will that change actually be affected on the ground. Um, and so in that sense, it's not a nice to have. It's absolutely critical that impact and performance are pulling in the same direction. I completely agree that you cannot. You cannot be a high impact organization unless you're high performance. Um, and if I think it is an interesting thing to see and analyze for every organization. What are the areas of performance that are actually yielding impact and what are not? And I think that often gives rise to some very interesting discussions around what should we as an organization continue to be doing and what we shouldn't, because it's actually not not having the change that we want to see or any kind of change at all. So yeah, overall very much in agreement with Shashank that it's not really a dichotomy here. They have to be pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, that while impact and performance are there in the same direction, uh, in a way, this does not give us a license to be inefficient.
Yeah.
Uh, so we understand that as NGOs, we are working on some of the most complex problems. These are problems that otherwise couldn't be solved by other actors. But that said, we are also resource constrained. So when we talk about impact, we need to create that balance of efficiency and effectiveness. We need to see where things are becoming wasteful. And as Kanishka said, look at which functions, which programs, which projects are actually contributing positively towards impact and which are not.
So we've spoken about the prime focus for nonprofits. We've also spoken about efficiency and impact. So based on that, let me now turn to Karthik. Karthik, as you have an experience in the private sector, could you comment on what elements of the corporate sector can a nonprofit organization incorporate?
Thanks, Arlene. Thanks, Shashank, Kanishka. Welcome everybody to this Sabko Namaskar. I think the key word is balance. The key word is choice. Do we as NGO leaders actually understand why we may want to adopt what we think is corporate, right? What is driving us? Is it like Shashank and Kanishka have said? Is it efficiency? Is it effectiveness? Um, and are we as leaders? I think the real thing that matters in making these choices is the mindset and of the leader of the NGO itself. It is our mindset that defines whether we can actually be open enough and wise enough to know what to take and what to leave, right? ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि यार मैंने सब कुछ ले लिया. Fundamentally, when we run NGOs, and today I am part of the leadership team of Cavalia, as you have seen, we are working with a different set of incentives than what I might call traditional capitalism, right? We attract people with a different set of incentives who want to do something slightly different in their lives. At the same time, we know that if we want to build an organization that will last beyond our personality and beyond our natural lives, then we need a system that can attract more talent and maybe hopefully better talent than we are today, right? So what do I want to do this? I want to do this because I want to attract people better than me, right? So that the organization lasts beyond me, right? So first, do I know why I want to do this? Am I ready to give up my my sense of control and my ego needs, so that I can actually let more and more people take over, and I can go in the background. And then am I ready to listen and choose wisely about what sort of people systems we need, what sort of culture we need, and do I also have self-reflection as a leader to say, what have we done right in my enterprise that I want to retain? What is my core, and what am I ready to give up? The key question for all of us when we, like Shashank and Kanishka are pointing out, is it's easy to say mujhe ye karna hai, but it is much more difficult to say I am ready to give up that, or main wo nahi karunga. That is actually genuinely difficult. So I would say, what do you take and what do you not take depends on these factors, and then you really have to make choices around structure, HR policies, all those things, which we don't have time to go into. But really, those are then second order problems, and you really have to start with the fundamentals.
Absolutely. And Shashank, what are your thoughts on this?
I can't agree more with what Karthik is saying. He has covered almost all the things that I believe can be taken from for-profit sector. Just a word of caution that I would put is, and then we need to choose what is good in the corporate sector. There's a lot which is good in the NGO sector. We need to ensure that we don't lose the essence of why NGOs are NGOs and blindly ape what the corporate world is doing, because it's not that they have achieved nirvana and we are still struggling. There are too many problems that can be pointed out in the corporate sector as well, which Karthik and Kanishka both will be well aware of. So let's be very cautious of what we are choosing, how we are adapting it in our context, and whether that's useful. And one key point I would say is the whole point about core competencies, focusing on a certain capability or what I can do better than others, and bringing together other organizations who complement me. Like if you look at the NGO sector, very few partnerships succeed. We have a vertically integrated structure in a sense of I will create the content, I will train the teachers, I will deliver it, everything, and I will monitor it. This doesn't happen in corporate. A soap company will make soap and market soap. Retail company will retail it. So that partnership is the other thing that I think something which is very difficult to execute, but something that we as leadership should be very, very focused on and see how we can do what we do well and bring together partners who do other things well.
So if how the leadership of an organization really determines the impact that an organization creates. So based on the conversation we've just had, Kanishka, would you like to share your thoughts on how nonprofits can exercise strategic leadership?
Yeah, and I think let me just maybe, so first of all, thanks everybody for organizing this, and thank you very much to everybody who's in the audience. Real pleasure and privilege to be here. If I may maybe put a slightly different twist to the question and address sort of head on the fact around this phase of conversation, which is around scaling. So how do you think strategically as an organization about scaling? And before I go into some ideas and reflections, let me just say that I think being a consultant is an interesting position because you get to advise a whole lot of organizations and institutions who in effect are much better experts than you are, but it's advantageous in the fact that you get to see what's working on what's not from many different perspectives, and you start getting a little bit of pattern recognition. And so all of that to say that is everything that I'm going to talk about right now is essentially picked up from interacting and engaging with people in the audience. So thank you for these insights, which I'm going to now parrot back to you. So when I'm thinking about leadership and scaling, there's this a report that I believe Britspan actually had written, where there was, I think, Vidya Shah who gave a definition. I'm going to read it out because I thought it was really good. And it goes, scaling according to us is not simply increasing the number of beneficiaries. Scaling means that we do that along with growing the organization. Scaling means change, and it means investments in areas which funders don't look at, in admin, HR, systems, processes, impact measurement, and so on. And I think this is a really good definition, and it kind of helps set the stage for basically what our view about scaling is, particularly for NGOs. It's about three things. One is the strategy, and in many ways, it's the whole picture, but it's a little bit around the horizontal view. What should we do as an organization? As we were just talking about it, what should you specialize in? What's our special sauce? And interestingly, I think some of the best conversations on scaling actually start with the conversation of what should we not do, which means you're very much reflecting on, what is it that I am capable and specially able to do, and what is it that's noise or things that other people are better at, and we should certainly help them and support them through partnerships. What's fixed and what's flexible in your model. So, and those are the things, typically are the ones that you are specialized to be doing. And what is our model in the first place, right? So while any kind of scale up strategy can include a little bit of experimentation and should, uh, typically the inflection point of an organization when you want to scale is when you have a fair bit of understanding of the core part of your model. So if you're using scale funding to experiment and figure out what you want to do, you're probably not at the right point to scale, because that will lead to challenges going forward. So what is that unit of scaling is going to be super important. The second thing in this framework is essentially what's the organization and operations. And as Karthik has said, that's everything from the org structure, the governance, the vertical development around HR, IT, finance, and so on. A couple of important best practices or insights that have emerged from our work is thinking about how do you kind of shift to organizational funding from programmatic funding that significantly helps in terms of the flexibility that you need to sometimes scale. How do you develop the capacity of your second and third layers of leadership, and not just the top layers? It's not just the founder and the founding team, but how do you actually proliferate talent and capacity throughout? It's something, from a private sector point of view, would be something that an investor would look at a company, right? Like, what's your management level, but then what's the next level and the next level below that? So really investing in developing their talent and skills. And this idea of I think the monitoring and evaluation, I think that's another really important part that oftentimes is left to the wayside when organizations are scaling and it's something that is actually quite, for most organizations, is quite well tuned to the use of digital technologies and innovation and automation to actually scale. I know I've talked a lot, so I'll wind up really quickly. But I think the third thing that I did want to point out is often the one element that is underplayed and underestimated, which is the people and cultural element. Oftentimes, organizations reach a certain scale basically on the foundation of their culture, particularly NGOs, right, that are mission and values driven organizations. But there's not enough strategic thinking by the leadership about what is that culture, what are these cultural artifacts that we want to continue, and how do we actually develop that culture as we grow from an organization of 10, where those challenges are perhaps not that significant, to 100, to a 500 person organization, where maintaining culture becomes a task. And going back to the point on lessons from the private sector, this is something that private sector entities do not take for granted, and do spend a lot of resources in making sure that what is our organizational culture, and how do we sustain it, but also how do we kind of build in flexibility so that as new people come in, new talent comes in, you can also change it. So those would be the three things that, from a sort of leadership and scaling point of view, that I think would be very, very important to think through. I know I probably bled a little bit into the next question as well, but hopefully would love to hear from the other panelists.
Absolutely. Shashank and Karthik, would you like to add on to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to look at it in a different manner, and I completely agree with everything that Kanishka had said. Just picking the unit of change conversation. So what we have seen in terms of organizations that scale is they create different phases in their growth. You may start as an organization which starts at a school, then you look at it as a cluster, or you look at it as a district, then you look at it as a state, and then nationwide. So, so creating that phases, or like creating those milestones, because these are also breaking point that can be there in your strategy, that becomes important. And that's where the point that Karthik was making, that a 10 people organization versus 100 people organization, which may be operating into multiple geographies, to 1,000 people organization will have different kind of challenges. And I think taking that long-term view and sort of detaching the organization and impact from the projects that you're executing. Projects are just a means to achieve the impact that you as an organization want to achieve. That mindset change is the beginning of how do you scale. Unless you do that, it's difficult to even convince a funder on why should they invest in, let's say, hiring a finance person who's not directly involved on the project. So you need to convince the funder on the long-term story. You need to ensure that you are also able to choose your funders from a large set that you will encounter, to find some who are long-term partners for you. Most of the organizations that have scaled will be able to tell you who are their 3 or 4 core funders who contribute maybe 40%, 50% of all the funding that they may be receiving even after scale up.
Karthik?
I just want to add to what Shashank and Kanishka have said. And I'm going to leap off what Shashank said. 2 points I'll leave behind with the people on this call. First is, what is the problem we are trying to solve? It's about framing the problem in a way, like Shashank is saying, in a way that is ambitious enough and wide enough so that you have the ability to catalyze people to participate in helping you solve that problem. What is the problem you're trying to solve? And how do you frame that? Right? I mean, that really is, like Shashank is saying, that's the story. Right? Am I trying to solve maths? And, for those who are joining this call from education, क्या मुझे SLO बढ़ाना है, student learning outcome बढ़ाना है 15%? Or am I trying to do something that builds a certain kind of citizenship for the country in the next 20, 30 years? What is the framing? And this, I think, is very critical, because the next point, which is, again, jumping off what Shashank is saying, there is a difference between, what is a 10-person organization, 50, 100, 1,000. And these are not the same people internally. It may look the same externally. The leadership may look the same, but inside they are completely different people, right? And that requires each one of us, and the second, third, fourth line of leadership. I think Kanishka referred to this earlier. You got to carry the whole team along. But that carrying the whole team along, from Cavalier's own experience over the last 10 years, 10, 12 years, we made at least 3 or 4 major pivots. And I can say with some reasonable confidence that the people who were here 10 years ago mentally are very different from the same person who is here today. Right? These are very different organizations, and it is the greatest challenge of leadership and of the second, third rung of leadership to be able to change themselves to fit the narrative, to meet the narrative of the new large frame that typically is much more wider, much more ambitious, and much more perhaps fulfilling for whoever is chasing that dream, right? And because it's a North Star, the reason we call it a North Star is because beach mein problem aayega, jaise COVID aaya, right? But you don't, that doesn't, the only reason we are still keeping sane and not going crazy is because we have a dream, hopefully, that is way beyond 1 year, right? We are not all collapsing and, we're not all going crazy, because I think we are hoping that something will change 5, 10, 20, 30 years. And therefore, we are playing an infinite game. We're not playing a finite. And the moment we frame it like that and frame goals and then change ourselves, I think that's the key to thinking differently about what does it mean to scale, what does it mean to build a more resilient organization. So a lot of what you're hearing, I think, is also true for a resilient organization, even if scale comes later.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
So
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I think absolutely right, and I think it goes back to that whole point around, when you're thinking about scale, what is it actually, when when you're saying what does it mean to your organization, it's very different from for an organization, as we discussed, that is, let's say, very community centric, and focus on essentially what we would refer to as depth, right? Like intergenerational stuff, things like sex trafficking. These are not things that you can, adopt a model that scales to 5,000 in a year, right? It's about spending time, energy, resources, probably adding a depth of functional areas. So there's sort of more of a horizontal scaling in that sense. And your job is to basically help the beneficiaries in that area. So that's a very different conception of scale, which is driven by who you are as an organization. And I think it's absolutely right that there's no one set path. The only thing that I think we've learned, and Shashank has also said this, is just that it has to start from your DNA as an organization, and what is that wider view that in terms of the vision you want to achieve. One final point on scaling, before I'll hand it back to you, Adelina, is just I think we've talked about different elements of scaling. Something that we've become quite interested to explore at Dalberg with some of the work that we're doing with our partners is how do you scale influence? Because for us, it's one of those factors that people don't truly understand very well. But the notion is, if you do it well, there's an extreme amount of leverage, right? Your sort of payoff in terms of investments to what you can achieve through influence and advocacy could be quite high. And we're working with several organizations to truly understand what that means. And I think one insight really quickly is going back to this whole idea that we discussed in the first part of the conversation, is around collaboration and partnerships. And particularly for the NGO sector, coming together as in a collaborative fashion just vastly enhances the influence that you as institutions can have. We've done some work on climate change where we tried to pull together a whole bunch of philanthropies on basically increasing funding, and the amount of cross learning that happens, and the amount of sort of just random conversations that actually yield to collaboration on the ground is quite interesting to see. And so I would say that's something that, again, organizations should consider in terms of when they're thinking about scaling, how do we scale our influence? And a lot of that is often about reaching out and collaborating with other people and other institutions.
Thank you so much, Kanishka and Karthik.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one point, and just building on what Kanishka said, that
Absolutely.
there are multiple ways to scale. So you can, as an organization, grow. You can as well try to grow the field. You can try to bring more people in, other organizations who play the same role that your organization is playing. And I think that's where the influence at some level becomes a different kind of influence. So replication of the model could be another way of scaling. Uh, Changing the public systems, whether it's a public education system, working with the government, ensuring that the biggest social sector organization, which is the government, they are able to adopt the right model. That's also a pathway to scale. And I think that's where what Kanishka pointed out, it's not necessary that I, as an organization, need to say, I've been working in 20 schools now, and I'm now next year I'm going to work in 50 and 500 and so on. I may as well say I have learned with the 20 schools, and now I'm working with CBSE or I'm working with the state education board, and I'm changing the curriculum to achieve what Karthik had earlier talked about, having better citizens, more aware citizens coming out of our schools. So I think that choice has to be made. And then it flows into all the operational elements that we talked about. What capacities do I want? How much resources should I dedicate to those capacity building? How do I even ask that question to the funders? So one of the challenge that NGOs face is getting money for this. We are talking in abstract right now. Karthik can probably talk about how challenging it can be for getting that flexible funding that Kanishka talked about, or getting someone to fund a fundraising person. Like the highest ROI investment that a funder can make is allow an NGO to create a development team which will raise more funds. An immediate 10 times ROI is achieved. Like within 1.5 years, you will have, like you spend 20 lakhs, that team will be generating 22 crores or more in funding. But you don't have that funding available in the system right now. We are doing a project right now to just look at the indirect costs of NGOs, and funders are not even funding the true indirect costs that NGOs have to incur to deliver the projects that they need to. So having candid conversations, raising these challenges, that becomes a very important factor. And that's one of the reasons why, despite having such large social issues, we have NGOs which are, sorry to say that, but they're subscale. Uh, like compare the NGOs in India, which will be operating at 200 crore, probably 500 crore as the largest uh, annual expenditure NGO. Compare that with something like BRAC, which is a global NGO, which will be operating at a different order of size because they have been able to get the mix right, the mix that Kanishka talked about. And it starts with having candid communication and creating that level of transparency and trust between the funder and the NGO to say that you're killing us by not paying us the right amount of money.
So you spoke about how the pathways and the framework of the organization is really important, and we also touched upon funding. So that actually leads me to the following question. I'd like to pose towards Karthik. What is the current response towards coping with the whole pandemic situation by the NGOs, by Indian NGOs currently?
Hmm. So the response of the NGOs, of us as NGOs, yeah. Again, I think there are 60 odd people on this call who have a huge amount of collective wisdom, right? So मैं जो कहने वाला हूँ ना तो कुछ original होगा, and neither will it be complete. ठीक है? So I would actually just throw out what my lived experience is, and I'm very aware that this is not relevant to all of us. Every one of us is unique, and then not actually invite people to actually share what their experiences are, because otherwise that's how we learn best from each other. So it's pretty clear that there are two types of capital that we have seen, two types of investors that we have seen in the space, which has become even more sharp in the last 12 months. There is patient capital, which has also not been easy, which has had a rough time. And there is programmatic mission-driven, largely for COVID sort of response, right? So COVID in education, COVID in health and community and so on, right? And all of these typically are either at a systemic level or at a community district level, right? Um, and the largest ones are usually ones for where the government, where there is an ability to work with the government, so that a COVID response is going to make a difference at scale, right? That's the situation. Nothing new uh, that we don't know. Um, so what have we done? I mean, I think what are some of our learnings? Um, in one way, I think in a weird way, for KEF and for the Piramal Foundation, it's been a cumulative learnings of what we have done in the last 10, 12 years, right? So this is not something that we learned last 12 months. It is something that somehow, for some reason, we were always working on in the last decade. Um, and during the COVID, I think some of this helped us remain more resilient, right? It helped us to continue doing the work, and in some cases actually grow the work. Um, and it helped us to sharpen whatever we were doing. So three things. The first is being very clear on what is core to my mission, to my ability to impact, to not this year, not next year, but for the next 10 years. Being very clear about the core. And the second is being therefore clear about what are the choices I'm making around what is non-core, especially when I'm having a tough time in fundraising, right? Core is not just products and stuff like that, right? The core is really about what do I do, where do I do my work, how do I partner, what is my impact, and therefore being also equally clear about what is patient capital for me and what is programmatic mission-based capital, right? And where do I want what, right? I mean, unfortunately, in this country, Bridgespan and both Bridgespan and Dalberg have done some work on this. I know the amount of patient capital available in this country is only so much, right? It's not sufficient to solve the problems in the country that we are facing over the next 50 years. That much is fairly clear, right? So patient capital is not much. The trick, therefore, is really how do you get that patient capital and what are the choices you're ready to make in order to build that patient capital relationship over a period of 2-3 decades, right? I can fairly say with a fair amount of confidence that it's a it's a genuine partnership. It's not donor, it is partner. It's mentor, right? And that's the greatest power. When we have the ability to have the kind of board members that we have, is because we have the patient capital and the mentoring in the form of Mr. Ajay Piramal, the chairman of the board, and the rest of the board, right? And if you go to our website, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Now, I think there are choices there. How do you work with that patient capital? So being very clear about where do I want to use patient capital and why, and where do I want to use programmatic capital? This is point one. At least that, and this has got very sharp in the last 12 months. The second is sheer adaptability. And I think इसमें बहुत सारे लोगों ने बहुत सारा काम किया, right? I think the kind of adaptation that I have seen in the civil service organizations is far greater than I have witnessed in 20 years in corporate across 2 or 3 recessions that I have lived through, right? It's incredible the kind of stories that we have heard from partners we work with. I mean, I think it's inspiring beyond belief, and I'm sure we all have stories here. Each one of the people on this call, I'm sure, are living those things, No, adaptation in my mind is actually 2-3 things. I'm looking at my notes. For us, we had to be very sharp about 3 things. In this moment, to stay relevant and to focus on to not have mission creep. What does the country need? What is valuable for the country? It's not about just what I want to do. What is genuinely valuable for the country in this moment of crisis? Where do I think the money is coming for? And what am I good at? 3 things. If you can get these 3 things to converge, then you probably have a better chance of getting lucky when the opportunity arises. Right? I mean, in my books, really luck is opportunity meeting preparedness. And we know that, 10 baar marega, ek baar lagega, but you have to be prepared. So adaptation is really critical, right? That's the second principle I think has worked for us. And finally, I think like others have said, I think it takes a village, really. It takes a village to get this done. I can think of so many times in the past 12 months, 24 months. What is the role of the core team members? What is my role? There are other core team members in the Piramal Foundation. We have a clear role. Then the directors have a role, right? Then the program managers have a role. Then the people in the field have a role. Everybody plays a role. That's just internal. Then the donor has a role because the donor is genuinely wanting to make a difference. I mean, we forget sometimes you are dealing with a human being who is committed to changing the country. It's not money, it's a person behind that money who has a dream, who has a private dream and an aspiration. And, how do I understand that person? How do I respect that person? How do I co-opt that person? How do I make them a partner? Right? That's really important. How do I listen? It's not easy. So it takes donors. It takes government. हमारा काम तो पूरा government system के साथ है at the state, national, district level, right? It takes government to believe that this change is possible in a time when teachers are sick with COVID, everybody is on COVID duty. Governments have to believe that this crazy dream you're saying, कि नहीं बच्चे अभी भी सीखेंगे, that is possible. So it takes commitment from the government, and we have seen some incredible stories on the government. So it takes 3-4 people to make this dream possible. 3-4 types of people, right? So if you can remain adaptable, if you can, get people to work together, right? And if you can be very clear internally on what is your mission and what are you committed to, these are the 3 things I think that have so far worked for us. We'll always learn new things and we'll see what new things work for us. So far, touch wood, somebody likes us, upar wala, and we've been very kind. We've been very blessed with the kind of people we have, the kind of stakeholders we have, the kind of donors we have. So, we've been very, very fortunate. But yeah, I think those are the 3 things that I would say, and then would love to hear and learn from everybody else on this call also.
Absolutely. I'm sure like we've touched upon the importance of knowing what the core of the organization is, and also on resilience and being adaptable. Plus, Karthik has highlighted on the fact how certain aspects of the organization are non-profit and innovative. Based on that, Kanishka, I'd like to pose the following question to you. What do you think are some of the major patterns for innovative practices that are proving to be helpful for nonprofits, especially in the current scenario?
Yeah, and thanks, Karthik, for those perspectives. I think incredibly helpful, particularly, as we've discussed, you're at the front lines of this, and so really helpful to learn from those thoughts. And look, I think we could, we could sit here and talk about like what are disruptions in technology and digital infrastructure that NGOs are using in terms of innovations. And as Karthik was saying, I think to be to be truly valuable, that conversation needs to be had at the level of the NGO, and it needs to happen in terms of what are your specific needs. So maybe what I'll talk about is just in terms of what we've seen in terms of what are the different kinds of innovations that we're seeing. And so there's and it kind of links quite well with the 3 things that Karthik was saying, which is we're seeing innovations in essentially business models of NGOs where you're trying to really look at short-term needs which align to what's coming out of COVID, which align to what the government is seeking in terms of just a large expansion of service delivery support. And you're trying to sort of see what elements of that can I, as an organization, tap into. So an example is, organizations that are working in farmer advisory services through SMSs and voice messages quickly turns that around to messages related to, prevention, practice of behaviors, timelines and guidelines from the government, and uses its network and its infrastructure to, reach beneficiaries. And in that sense, actually, stays true to its longer term business model around, providing a bunch of different services to its beneficiaries, but is also able to attract funding in the short term for very, very critical causes. So it goes back to that point that Karthik was saying, which is like, using the idea of what we're good at, not in a restrictive sense, but really trying to see how can we apply these unique set of skills to different situations, and how does that map to those priorities. So that's one. The second is this whole idea of long-term thinking. And here I'm talking specifically about, let's say, digital transformation. I think a lot has been written about greater digital transformation in the NGO sector, and it's been something that people have been talking about for probably 2 decades now, even before digital was a thing. And it's never really come about because there's always n number of things that are priority before that. No, I have to serve the customer. No, I have to raise funds, and okay, we'll think about this later. Uh, this is a fantastic opportunity because everybody is focused on it. Funders are now finally willing to fund, digital infrastructure for NGOs, digital services, and and then I think the key thing here is to think long term about it and not think about incorporating these innovations and disruptions to your products and services as a stopgap, but actually how are these integral and core to our mission, and how can we incorporate them and actually utilize them to be a better organization. And I think those NGOs and those institutions are actually thinking about this in a really sort of clear-eyed way, which allows you to kind of you know um, not be swayed by just the immediate urgency of the situation, but also think about like, okay, now is a good opportunity to actually put in place a series of large sort of transformations that we've been thinking about, and there's a bit of an alignment around that. So that's the second one. And the third one is, again, I think the innovation is, we often tend to think about it in very technological terms, but for us, I think the innovations has happened in primarily in partnerships, and how organizations are linking with other organizations, whether it's through SMS, through phones, through data, through whatever, it's both how NGOs are increasing local capacity within countries to understand how their systems are working, is money flowing. It's how local partners and different NGOs who have not necessarily collaborated in the past are linking with each other to help first get information about the kinds of services that their beneficiaries need, and then working together to supply them. So, because the challenges have certainly increased, the work has not stopped, and a lot of that work is happening because of extremely cool partnerships. And so that's been enormously, I think, exciting to see, and I did want to point that out.
I just want to add to that. See, actually, there in Cavalier, we are sort of almost schizophrenically two different organizations. There is a state level work, and then there's district level work, right? And the district level work that we have done is really exactly what Kanishka has been talking about, right? Which is that there is no way, we knew this 12 years ago when we started. There is no way that Cavalier is here to solve the country's problems. We cannot do it alone, right? We might be able to solve one part of the problem, right? But really, is there a way to build a collaboration of NGOs at the aspirational district program? And today we've got a couple of hundred NGOs that we work with in the aspirational district program, where we are partnering closely to do everything from, a bunch of campaigns around girl child education. During COVID, it was the Surakshit Dada Dadi Nana Nani campaign that we did with Niti Aayog. It really comes down to the power of the collective in a time like this. it is impossible for a single NGO to even imagine that we can make a difference of the scale that is genuinely this country needs, right? In fact, one of Cavalier's ex-core team members, alumni, is Anurag, is on the call, has joined the call today. And at some point, if you guys should reach out to him. Anurag used to be part of the district aspiration district program, and you guys should reach out to Anurag because it's exactly like Kanishka is saying. I think together we can achieve so much more, right? And the money will come for that. The universe somehow conspires and provides because we are genuinely together solving a problem which the country needs. And I always believe that is really important.
Thank you so much, Kanishka and Karthik.
At one point that we have seen NGOs being able to do. So one positive that came out of this was that some of the organizations were able to question some very deep-rooted assumptions on what works and what doesn't work. And they were able to, some were forced, some leadership took that as an opportunity to just look at the legacy programs as well and see, is this the right way of doing it? The context has changed, things have changed in the external world. Can we do it more efficiently and more effectively? And that's where innovation has happened, not just, as Kanishka pointed out, it's not just about technology. It has also been in the core program delivery model or the processes that the NGOs follow. The other thing that we have also seen is it has worked on both sides. Some funders have taken those steps, some NGOs have taken those steps. They have taken this opportunity to strengthen their relationships. Funders have reached out to what they consider as their core partner NGOs and tried to help. NGOs have reached out to funders who they believe are going to be significant in the long run and shared information, work together to create these solutions. See, funders are not working against NGOs, but they somehow we have, and Brispan is a NGO, so I'm using the word we very consciously, that we create this barrier that funder is like an auditor who will come and who will just point all the mistakes that I've made in my life and go back in his or her 5-star hotel and have a champagne. That's not necessarily true. Unless we give them an opportunity to co-create, how would they have the same sense of ownership that we have about our programs, our projects? And some of the NGOs have taken this opportunity to bring funders into conversations of saying, this is once in a lifetime crisis. We are brainstorming about this. We would love to have your inputs. And that creates better funder connect. So I think those were the two things that I wanted to highlight.
Thank you so much, Frank. So now we are nearing the end, the closing of our panel discussion. So if you have any questions, attendees, you could please share it in the chat box. My final question, I like to pose it to Karthik. What can nonprofits do to guide themselves through the current times as we're moving forward?
Well, that's a very large question, but if you forced me to give a single answer, I would say measure your progress by learning, not by outcomes, at least for the next 6 months to 12 months. This is a crisis that is an opportunity. All sorts of white spaces are opening up. The greatest learning will be the people who have, whoever learns most will have the greatest ability to impact and greatest ability to get money or, whatever it is that your mission is. So measure, this is like, the world has changed. Everything is up in the air. And I think each one of us on this call has spent enough sleepless nights living with the choices we made as leaders. And it was not easy. I mean, I can tell you it's not been easy for me. right? Measure your learning. Don't measure your outcomes because wo aayega jayega. And if you can do that, and if you're learning fast, really fast, then the next 12 months is going to be 12 months, 2 years, 10 years. I think it's going to be exceptionally rewarding.
Absolutely. I see that we have 2 minutes until 5 p.m. right now. So,
Sorry, Shashank
Katrina, I
wants to
just
say
wanted
something.
to like just leave with a phrase. I have a hard stop at 5. I think the other thing that NGOs really need to do right now is focus on the core. Karthik made that point earlier as well. And this could be what's the core essence of the organization. It could be what are the core programs of the organization, what are the core funders of the organization, and like give special emphasis to that and protect that is the only point I would make in the current crisis scenario, because this situation is not going away pretty quickly. The funding constraint is going to stay for some time. So
absolutely. We are. So I do understand that we are highlighted on like mainly the three important aspects with respect to scaling. One is human investment, and the second thing really that's really helpful for NGOs right now is collaborations and relationship building. And finally, but not the least, having the audacity to change and being resilient and being adaptable. As we are nearing the end of our time, we can now conclude by thanking all of our members of the panel for the really excellent insights into the questions that were raised. Thank you so much, Shashank, Kanishka, and Karthik for being with us today. And thank you everyone for joining us for the session and for being a wonderful audience. I request you to please fill the feedback form as it will help us curate many more sessions like these. As mentioned earlier, if you have any questions that have remained unanswered in the session, please put in the queries on the feedback form and we will ask our panelists to answer the questions offline and we will share it with you via email. We hope to see you all for our webinar next week on grants available for NGOs, which will be facilitated by HCL Foundation and Dasra. The event is scheduled to be held on 27 January, Wednesday, from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. We'll be sharing the RSVP link with you in the chat box in a bit. And we will also be sharing the details of the same on email and on the WhatsApp group. Thank you so much, everyone, once again for the great work that you all do. And I hope you all have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you very
very
much.
much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.